What drives the human desire to sing? According to voice studies, singing is used for communication, such as between mother and child, between the self and others, and as a means to uphold, challenge, or communicate social and cultural values. Singing can fill psychological needs, such as improving overall mental performance. From the composer's standpoint, French composer Reynaldo Hahn claims that singing satisfies a desire to endow words or thoughts with a semblance of eternity. From the singer's perspective, one young singer claims that it simply makes her happy. What then would happen if one singing voice could save the world? Video games are a medium that frequently broaches this topic. It is an easy trope that gives purpose to the narrative and for the player of the game. Psycho Soldier introduced the concept of the live human singing voice into video games, with Japanese idol Kaori Shimizu lending her voice as the aspiring pop idol Athena on the title track. Shimizu's voice can be heard in low resolution over the side-scroller's first stage. As game history evolved, so did the role of the singing voice. Per Ivan Stingel-Voigt, the singing voice can serve as a vehicle to provide information to the player with texts fulfilling central and informative and/or narrative functions. What happens then when the singer is the sole playable protagonist and their vocal capabilities as part of gameplay? Two games, Transistor and Wandersong, occupy this novel space, featuring protagonists who identify as singers and whose voices are central to the plot and gameplay, albeit in contrasting ways. This presentation examines how these games, while varying in genre and gameplay, establish their playable protagonists as singers through narrative, ludic, and musical elements. I begin by drawing from voice studies to establish a singer's identity through primary characteristics. After laying the foundation to a potential protagonist's core personality, I suggest elements that should be present to further build the singer's identity. The narrative elements may include how the game constructs the singer's identity through character dialogue or visual cues, as well as how the world treats the singer. Ludic functions are straightforward. How can the player take control of this character and thereby their voice to reinforce their identity? Subsequently, I draw upon film studies with specific respect to the diegesis. The protagonist's singing voice must be present in the game soundtrack. Finally, I apply these elements as they pertain to Transistor and Wandersong and how the games approach their respective protagonists. To be clear, this presentation does not focus on singers as part of ensemble casts in games such as Final Fantasy X-2 and Fire Emblem Three Houses. A number of characters identify as singers and in some cases give an in-game performance, but these games do not dwell on that part of their identities. Instead, this presentation concentrates on games with a single protagonist whose voice is central to the narrative and uses their voice as part of gameplay in some way, whether actively or passively. Using Transistor and Wandersong as case studies, I propose a model for the singer as protagonist which establishes, challenges, and supports the singer identity, and with it, I suggest a method in which to evaluate and create vocalist characters in video games. When introducing the concept of the musician identity, Hargreaves et al. Note, the idea of the self as a kind of focus, or relatively unchanging core aspect of the individual's personalities, has given way to a much less static and more dynamic view of the self as something which is constantly being reconstructed and renegotiated according to the experiences, situations, and other people whom we interact in everyday life. Graham Welch, however, indicates that the voice is an essential aspect of our human identity, of who we are, how we feel, how we communicate, and how other people experience us. This may suggest that our voices, literally and metaphorically, are inextricably linked to our identity. Singers seem painfully aware of this, observing the self and the voice as an inseparable unit. With this conflict of a malleable identity and one's unchanging physical voice in mind, the identity of a singer then is complicated and multifaceted. Anthony Kemp states it is precisely because the singer is their own instrument. The singer's instrument is personal, invisible, and cannot hide behind an instrument that offers a personality to project. Voice studies generally explore the environmental influences on how this intricate identity is formed, from early musical exposure and experience to student-teacher relationships. To challenge a singer's identity is to challenge one's whole identity. A change in life circumstances can feel like the loss of oneself. When confronted with loss of career or physical voice from injury, illness, or psychological trauma, singers question who they are if not a singer. Studies recognize the journey to adapting to the trauma or not, and conclude that singers who do return to singing must work with their new voice instead of against it. While these studies take care to document the creation, maintenance, and evolution of identity, few provide guidance on clear, concise personality traits shared by singers. In a game where the state of the world is at stake, there will be little time to devote to a hero's origins and thereby identity development. Identifiable characteristics may help in conveying this identity to a player who may only know a protagonist for a few hours. Kemp provides the clearest outline on distinct traits. As described in his study, singers are extroverted, independent, and sensitive. Per his research, extroversion was demonstrated through high levels of outgoingness and adventurousness. He casts singers as independent through high degrees of dominance and suspiciousness. Furthermore, he loosely labels singers as sensitive. Not only does this refer to being feelingful, but also in regards to an awareness of one's own body. As replicating the bodily sensation of singing would be difficult, the term sensitivity could instead be used to describe a protagonist's feelings. Personality traits are but one aspect needed for a singer in a video game. This section will expand and build upon how the story and soundtrack can reinforce a singer's identity, thus creating a model. The hero should exhibit certain qualities, while the narrative will need to support and navigate the identity of that character. Being a video game, the player must be involved in the music making, and the game should highlight the singer's abilities. This proposed model is a guide, and playing with certain elements is encouraged when creating a singer. As stated previously, Kemp's personality traits should make up the core of the protagonist. Of course, no two singers are the same, but a singer should display these traits to an extent. The narrative and the game world should support a singer's identity. This can be through character dialogue, where the protagonist affirms their own identity, and visual cues that show the singer in the act in some way. This can also be achieved through flavor text, which is informational text on characters, locations, and so on that is unrelated to gameplay. Not only this, but the world should also comment on the singer's identity. What do characters say? Presence of voices in the world can speak volumes to and about its hero. Characters may be fully or partially voice acted. Likewise, there is the possibility for the use of abstract and synthetic voices, as explored by Elizabeth Medina Gray in her studies on abstract voices in games, and William Chang's study on the impact of synthetic voices in Final Fantasy VI. In addition, the narrative should challenge the protagonist's identity. In a story about a singer who must constantly grapple identity with an inseparable voice, the game should generate conflict within the protagonist and their identity in order for that character and/or the story to develop. A resolution should be achieved by the end of the game. The player must be able to control the singer's ability to sing. Since the player manipulates the body of the protagonist, they also should be able to control their voice because the body and the instrument are one and the same. Therefore, at least one button must be dedicated to singing. Additionally, singing should adapt to the diegetic and non-diegetic music. Creating a musical system with pre-assigned notes may be easier, but this will likely cause dissonance with the underscore. Players will likely appreciate the consonance of adaptive music. The music in the game and the presence of the singing voice is vital. Per Jennifer Smith, vocal performances can define characters through various aspects of sung materials, including lyrical meaning, musical connotations, and character development through speech and song. The protagonist's voice should be on full display through some variety of diegetic performance. Meanwhile, Jeff Smith suggests that films do not always have a clear distinction between the diegetic and non-diegetic. The lines are often blurred. Since video games are interactive unlike films, there can and should be songs in the game that straddle the line in order to provide information to the player. The following case studies will detail further on how a game may handle a singer's performance beyond a simple visual performance. For the sake of time, I will present the highlights of each case study. Transistor is an action role-playing game developed by Supergiant Games with soundtrack and songs composed by Darren Korb. Music is a vital component to the studio's games, and with this game in particular, the music is critical to the world and its protagonist. The hero, Red, is a popular singer in the city of Cloudbank. The antagonist group, called the Camerata, noticed her influence and sought to remove her. An assassination attempt is made, but only succeeds in stealing her physical voice. Hence, Red is a mute protagonist, though she is not silent. Instead, she voices her thoughts through text. The game then relies on visual and narrative cues, as well as music, to establish Red's singer identity. The narrative necessitates Red to be independent. Aside from her talking sword, the Transistor, she is basically alone. She also notably does not heed the Transistor's warning to run away at the start of the game.
Do not turn left.
Despite his call for her to not turn left, without the player's control,
You turn left.
this defiant action informs the player of her individualistic mind. A defining moment occurs at the start of the game. The player is given an option to interact with a concert advertisement of Red. If the player chooses that option, the screen cuts to a close-up of Red viewing the poster. The Transistor urges her to keep moving, but the player can opt to stay and watch. This moment is necessary in establishing how much singing means to Red. Staring at the poster implies that she is mourning the loss of a part of herself. Transistor employs full voice acting, although 3 characters, the Transistor and Camerata members Asher Kendrill and Royce Brackett, speak at length. The narrative has reason for this. City citizens are removed from Cloudbank by robots called the Process, therefore they have no physical presence. The resulting lack of people and their voices, in addition to providing voices to the few remaining, truly isolate Red and force her to reckon with her identity alone. The challenge to Red's identity triggers the narrative. As implied by the Transistor, retrieving her voice is a motivation in her revenge, thus providing an objective for the player. At game's end, Red is given power to rebuild Cloudbank, except the citizens are gone and she remains mute. The game certainly prepares for this world-saving option with Red's choice to turn left. Instead of coming to terms with her loneliness and an altered identity, however, she chooses to impale herself with Transistor, accordingly ending her presence in Cloudbank. Red then reunites with the voice of the Transistor, where she smiles and speaks one word, "Hey." Despite the opportunity to build a world anew, Red chose to go to a place where she could have, among other things, her voice. Red can produce sound. Not only does she grunt when performing physical actions, she can also hum. One of the game's less explicit controls is to allow Red to hum outside of combat. The player must press and hold a button to initiate humming along to the non-diegetic soundtrack. This function is completely optional and has no narrative purpose. This inclusion can allow the player to slow down and, by extension, allow Red a moment to breathe. Humming clues the player on the importance singing has to Red as a means of communication. In agreement with Jennifer Smith, inclusion of Red's songs within the soundscape upholds her singer identity, and she notes that it is intentionally unclear to the player whether or not Red is hearing these songs in her own head and thus reminiscing. This ambiguity means that the game relies on transdiegetic songs, or songs that provide information but are not distinctly diegetic or non-diegetic, to display Red's vocal capabilities as well as a view into her mind. These songs play at various moments and supply information about the world and Red. With vocals provided by Ashley Barrett, there are 4 songs in the game: The Spine, In Circles, We All Become, and finally, Paper Boats. In Circles, for example, plays during battle with Camerata member Sybil Rise, who was assimilated with the process. While the player attacks Sybil with a transistor, the song's lyrical content too is a direct assault. Red clearly expresses that she has no sympathy for Sybil's predicament as she sings, "I see you hurting, I do what I can, but I won't save you."
Go for it.
Conversely, Paper Boats is a love song that begins after Red impales herself. Corb's lyrics provide insight on her feelings for the transistor and why she made her shocking choice. Accompanying these images is her promise to always find you, like it's written in the stars. You can run, but you can't hide. Try. Images of her and the human body of the transistor roll, including sharing a kiss on a stage wing. At several points in the game, the transistor declares his love for her, and finally, she can do so in the best way she knows how, by singing. Wandersong is a puzzle adventure game developed by Greg Lobanov, with music composed by Lobanov and Gordon McGladdery. The protagonist, called Bard or Kiwi, is a bard in a small town who receives a prophetic dream that they are the hero that can save the world. Kiwi traverses the world in search of the Earth Song in order to prevent the apocalypse. Kiwi is an especially vocal character, for they use their singing voice as their weapon of choice. Instead of accepting a gift of a sword, they use their singing voice to solve problems. The player controls Kiwi's voice in order to complete puzzles, assist non-playable characters, henceforth NPCs, and to advance the narrative. Kiwi is extremely extroverted. The secondary protagonist, Miriam, even comments as such. Throughout the game, the player as Kiwi is given options to interact with humanoid and animal NPCs, and in many of these interactions, they sport a smile and occasionally reply enthusiastically. The narrative makes Kiwi's identity apparent from the beginning. From the game's first act, NPCs often confirm Kiwi's identity, referring to them as Bard, Bardlet, Bardling, Little Bird, Minstrel, and Songdork. Kiwi too affirms their Bard identity several times. Wandersong employs abstract voice acting. A majority of the cast are voiced by humans, but the voices do not directly mirror the text in dialogue boxes. Instead, the characters may laugh, groan, or gasp while the dialogue runs. Medina Gray describes this as removing logos from the echos and topos. Although the meaning of the words is derived from the visual text, the timbre of the voice and the animated action of the body can help the player complete the whole of the voice. The fact that the ensemble cast of characters have voices is critical to the final act especially. Through optional dialogue, a monk NPC reveals that the goddess Aya sings a song to end the world and start a new one. When the world seems lost, and inspired by Kiwi, the NPCs begin to sing at random and to the best of their abilities. Following Kiwi's lead, the voices and underscore texture gradually increase until everyone sings in unison, the score flourishing in triumph. In fact, this is precisely what prevents the world from ending. Aya's messenger comments that the world harmonized with Aya's song, something otherwise impossible, but made possible through Kiwi's determination and voice. Kiwi's challenge to their identity occurs when the true prophetic hero makes her presence known. She will end the world with a sword, not save it with a song. While this is not an attack on Kiwi's singer identity, this development affects the quality of their voice. Instead of singing full, sustained notes, Kiwi's voice is temporarily weak and quiet, indicating a loss of confidence. This does not last long, and later on, Kiwi admits that they are unsure if they came to terms with not being the hero. While Kiwi's identity remains consistent, they are indeed forced to examine it. Because they stayed true to this identity, they are ultimately successful in their objective. Lobanov describes Kiwi as a walking musical instrument. Inspired by his own singing and a developmental experiment, Lobanov created a rainbow wheel by which a player can produce music. The wheel has 8 pieces, each representing a distinct scale degree. The process of creating and implementing the sounds of the wheel was complicated. John Robert Matz, the voice of Kiwi, recorded 4 variations of each note with consonant and vowel variations. The result is perfectly looped singing sounds. In execution, the player is treated to randomized singing sounds that align with the key of the non-diegetic score. At any time, whether performing a ludic task or not, the player may pull up the wheel and Kiwi can sing a note that aligns with the key of the current musical track. Certain elements in the world, such as flowers, can react to these sounds too, matching the color of the current note on the wheel. Equally important, Kiwi's voice is necessary to the aid in completion of large and small ludic tasks. One comical example is navigating a pirate ship via a sea shanty. So long as the player is actively moving the boat with the rainbow wheel, Kiwi and the pirates sing. When the movement stops, the singing stops. Therefore, Kiwi's voice is vital to the action. As Kiwi's identity is central to the plot, performance is integral to how the story progresses. In fact, Kiwi's performances are ambi-diegetic, or music that is performed on screen that helps advance the narrative. The player cannot progress through the game without participating in these numbers, including a defining performance, I Wanna Be a Hero. The player is not given a choice in skipping or passively watching the performance. They must use the rainbow wheel to aid in Kiwi's musical statement of their motivating desire. The game indicates the correct note by placing a symbol on one of the 8 colors that the player must select for Kiwi to make a sound. There is no time limit on how long a player can stay on a single note. The game music will adapt to the speed of the player's inputs, thereby making this performance their own as much as Kiwi's. Here, Kiwi theatrically articulates their need to save the world from ending, placing them at the center of the narrative stage. Using one's physical voice to create music is universal and intricately attached to our human identities. To completely divorce one's voice from their identity may prove difficult, and a singer must commit to a lifelong endeavor to keep that identity versatile. Video games can present opportunity to showcase that identity in larger-than-life ways, from simple verbal cues to active participation in a large musical number. The proposed model may be used to inspire developers in character creation. The framework provides a foundation in which to build a game around a singer and encourages experimentation with implementation of the singing voice in the ludic space. As demonstrated by the model, Transistor and Wandersong exemplify the ideal singer-protagonist, crafting their heroes so that the player cannot question their vocalist status. Transistor and Wandersong exemplify the ideal singer-protagonist, crafting their heroes so that the player cannot question their vocalist status. Transistor plants hints to piece together, whereas Wandersong utilizes that identity from start to end. Nonetheless, both games allow a player to participate in the struggles of maintaining a singer's identity, engage in a music-making process, and experience the joys of the art of song. Further research may include creating a reduced model for singer characters as part of ensemble casts, to which identity may or may not be as necessary among the storylines of multiple characters. The cast of singers in Final Fantasy X-2 and Fire Emblem Three Houses would fit into much of the proposed criteria. Determining which criteria is most relevant and necessary invites further study. With a plethora of other musician protagonists, a similar model could easily be created based on corresponding music identity scholarship. Indeed, Kemp's work covers not only singers, but conductors and instrumentalists as well. While his work is not the pinnacle of music identity studies, it may serve as a starting point when considering characteristics of different types of musicians as lead characters. Instrumentalists likewise have the advantage of a physical instrument to perform a wider variety of ludic actions, including engaging with the instrument's intended purpose of music making. There is creative potential to exhibit a music-wielding protagonist's power, especially for any bard-type character.